Daniel Carter, the multimillionaire CEO of a major retail chain, goes undercover in one of his own stores. His plan? Observe his employees in action. But when a cashier, completely unaware of his true identity, starts talking trash about the company and its owner, Daniel freezes on the spot, because what this cashier is saying could destroy everything. Daniel Carter had spent years building his company, Carter's Essentials, from the ground up. What had once been a small corner store had grown into a thriving supermarket chain with locations across the state. To Daniel, it was more than just a business. It was his legacy. His stores were known for top-tier service, fair prices, and customer satisfaction. At least, that is what Daniel thought. Lately, however, troubling reports had begun piling up. Customers were complaining about rude staff, missing discounts, and strange charges on receipts. Even worse, whispers of unfair treatment towards certain customers were beginning to surface. Daniel took these complaints seriously, but every time he confronted his senior managers, he got the same rehearsed response. "Sir, everything is running perfectly fine. No issues, no problems, just excuses." But Daniel was not convinced. A gut feeling told him something was wrong, something his managers were hiding. So, he made a decision. He was going undercover. For 1 week, he would leave his executive office, trade in his tailored suits, and step onto the floor as a regular employee. No special treatment, no authority, just an ordinary worker. He dressed in a basic store uniform, the same blue polo and khaki pants his cashiers wore. His golden CEO name tag was replaced with a simple plastic one that read, "Dan, Trainee." No one in the store would know who he was. His plan? Observe, listen, and see the truth for himself. Walking into one of his own stores as a trainee cashier, Daniel felt an odd mix of excitement and unease. Would his employees treat him well? Would they follow the customer service standards he had built? Or would he finally uncover the truth? He took his place behind the counter, standing next to a seasoned cashier. Her name tag read Jessica. She barely glanced at him. Her posture was relaxed, too comfortable, like she knew she could get away with anything. Daniel kept his expression neutral. Just watch and listen, he reminded himself. But what he did not expect, what he never could have prepared for, was that the truth would hit him like a freight train. Because Jessica, the very cashier standing next to him, would say something so shocking, so career-ending, that Daniel would freeze in place, his heart pounding, his breath caught in his throat, and in that moment, he would realize everything he thought he knew about his company was a lie. Daniel Carter, the founder and CEO of Carter's Essentials, was no stranger to hard work. Having built his supermarket chain from a single storefront to a multi-state operation, he prided himself on his commitment to customer satisfaction and employee welfare. However, recent customer complaints and unsettling employee feedback had started to paint a different picture, one that Daniel could not ignore. Daniel decided that to truly understand the issues, he needed to see the operations from the ground level. He devised a plan to go undercover, disguising himself as a new employee named Dan. Dressed in the standard employee uniform and a name tag that bore no trace of his executive status, he aimed to blend in as a trainee cashier at one of his busiest stores. On his first day, Daniel was assigned to train under Mike, a veteran cashier known among the staff for his dismissive attitude towards management and questionable customer service ethics. Mike's reputation for bending rules was well known among his peers, but had somehow never been flagged in a way that prompted a formal review. This oversight was something Daniel had come to regret as he embarked on this undercover journey. As they began their shift, Mike wasted no time in sharing his views on the job. "You'll learn that around here. It's every man for himself. The bosses don't care about us, so why should we care?" he said, a sneer evident in his tone. Within the first hour, Daniel watched as Mike interacted with customers with a level of disdain that was both shocking and disheartening. Mike openly mocked an elderly woman struggling with the new digital payment system, telling her she might be better off sticking to cash. When a young couple questioned an unexpected charge on their bill, Mike dismissively told them it was a standard fee that couldn't be waived, even though no such fee existed. As the day progressed, Daniel's initial unease turned into alarm. Mike's behavior grew increasingly bold. He bragged about overcharging distracted customers, especially during rush hours when people were less likely to scrutinize their receipts. "It's the easiest way to make a few extra bucks," Mike chuckled, oblivious to the identity of his new trainee. Daniel's concern deepened when Mike began sharing more of his exploits. During a quiet moment between customer rushes, Mike leaned in close and whispered, "You see, Dan, the trick is to keep the boss thinking you're on his side while you take a little off the top. I've got schemes that Carter himself wouldn't even notice." Hearing his own name used so contemptuously stung Daniel, but he maintained his composure, noting everything. Mike went on to detail how he manipulated sales records and pocketed cash from voided transactions. He even boasted about a network of similar-minded employees across several stores who engaged in these practices. The realization that this was not just an issue with one rogue employee, but a systemic problem left Daniel reeling. He knew that taking action against Mike would be just the first step in a much larger battle to reclaim the integrity of his business. Determined to gather undeniable evidence, Daniel began discreetly recording their conversations with his phone, careful to ensure it was hidden from view. As Mike continued to divulge his methods, Daniel's resolve hardened. This undercover experience was transforming from a fact-finding mission into a personal crusade to root out corruption and restore his company's values. After his shift ended, Daniel sat in his car, overwhelmed by the magnitude of betrayal. The drive home was a blur of mixed emotions: anger, sadness, and a fierce determination to set things right. That night, as he lay awake, the weight of the task ahead was both daunting and clarifying. The following days brought more revelations. Daniel, still undercover as Dan, was rotated through different departments and trained with various employees. While many were hard-working and honest, he uncovered several more who were complicit in practices similar to Mike's. Each day added layers to the web of deceit that had infiltrated his company. As his week of undercover work neared its end, Daniel compiled a comprehensive report based on his recordings, observations, and personal interactions. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. With a heavy heart, he prepared to step back into his role as CEO, this time with a mission to not only confront those responsible, but to overhaul the entire operational ethos of Carter's Essentials. The day Daniel revealed his true identity to the staff was one of mixed reactions. Shock and disbelief were followed by a palpable sense of accountability. Mike, along with several others implicated in the schemes, were immediately suspended pending a full investigation. In the weeks that followed, Daniel implemented sweeping changes. He introduced stricter oversight measures, established a new code of conduct, and launched a company-wide training program emphasizing ethical behavior and customer respect. Transparency became his mantra, and he held frequent open forums where employees could voice concerns and offer suggestions without fear of reprisal. The cleanup was neither quick nor easy, but it was effective. Over time, the culture within Carter's Essentials began to shift back towards the standards Daniel had set when he first founded the company. Customer complaints decreased, employee morale improved, and slowly, the reputation of Carter's Essentials was restored. Looking back, Daniel knew that going undercover was one of the toughest but most necessary actions he had ever taken. It not only exposed the problems within his company but also reaffirmed his commitment to his employees and customers. He had emerged from the experience a more aware and determined leader, ready to face any future challenges with a renewed spirit of vigilance and integrity. Daniel's stint as Dan the trainee was reaching a critical point. Each passing day brought more revelations, but nothing prepared him for what was to unfold during one particularly revealing shift with Mike. Daniel had been playing along, nodding and pretending to agree with Mike's questionable methods. His compliance seemed to put Mike at ease, and he began to open up even more about the depths of the corruption within the store. Mike leaned in, lowering his voice as if what he was about to reveal was even more secretive than his usual rants. "You know, it's not just us cashiers who have a side gig going," he said with a smirk. "The big boss of this place, the store manager, he's in on it too. Helps cover up the bigger stuff, like some of the inventory that goes missing." Mike chuckled, clearly proud of their deceit. The revelation hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. The store manager, someone he had personally promoted based on his seemingly impeccable track record and loyalty, was involved. It was a betrayal of everything Daniel stood for. But he needed to keep his cover, so he forced a smile and asked, "Really? How does that work?" Encouraged by Daniel's interest, Mike elaborated on their scheme, detailing how they manipulated inventory records and skimmed profits, sharing the spoils among themselves, ensuring everyone involved stayed quiet. "It's a sweet deal, as long as everyone keeps their mouth shut and does their part," Mike explained nonchalantly. As they were talking, a customer approached the register. Daniel watched as Mike greeted them with a disarming smile, the kind of smile that had likely fooled hundreds of customers before. The customer, unaware of what was about to happen, handed over several items, trusting Mike to handle the transaction honestly. Mike rang up the items, but with quick fingers, he added a phantom charge, an extra fee cleverly hidden amongst legitimate ones. The customer, distracted by their phone, didn't notice the total price was higher than it should have been. They swiped their card, thanked Mike, and left, completely unaware of being scammed. Inside, Daniel was seething. Witnessing the deception firsthand, the boldness of committing fraud right in front of him made his blood boil. However, outwardly, he maintained his composure. He knew that any slip-up could jeopardize his chance to bring the whole operation down. That evening, after his shift ended, Daniel sat alone in his car, the weight of the day's discoveries pressing down on him. The extent of the corruption was more widespread and rooted than he had imagined. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was an organized group, led by those he had trusted most. The drive home was a blur. His mind raced with the implications of Mike's revelations and the deceit he had just witnessed. By the time he reached his driveway, Daniel had made a decision. This charade would end, and decisive action would be taken. He could no longer afford to watch from the shadows. The next morning, Daniel didn't put on the trainee uniform. Instead, he dressed in his suit, the one he wore when he felt the need to remind the world of who he was. Daniel Carter, CEO of Carter's Essentials. He drove to the store, his heart pounding with a mixture of anger and determination. As he walked through the sliding doors of the supermarket, the familiar beep of the scanners and the bustle of the morning shoppers filled the air. But today, he was not here to observe. He was here to act. Daniel headed straight for the manager's office. The store manager, upon seeing Daniel, initially mistook his appearance for a routine visit. However, the stern look on Daniel's face and the absence of prior notification dispelled that notion quickly. Without waiting for an invitation, Daniel stepped into the office, closing the door behind him with a definitive thud. He turned to face the manager, his expression unreadable. "I know about the theft, the scams, and your part in all of it," Daniel began, his voice steady, but filled with an intensity that made the manager blanch. The conversation that followed was tense. Daniel outlined everything he had learned, from Mike's admissions to the evidence he had gathered. The manager tried to deny the accusations at first, but soon realized the futility of lying. Faced with the threat of legal action and public disgrace, he confessed, providing details that only deepened the extent of the corruption. Daniel listened, his disappointment turning to resolve. Once he had everything he needed, he thanked the manager for his cooperation and informed him of his immediate suspension. Security was called to escort the manager out of the building, a clear sign to everyone that the reign of corruption had ended. With the manager gone, Daniel addressed the entire staff. He revealed his true identity and the purpose of his undercover mission. The shock among the employees was palpable, a mix of disbelief and awe. Daniel spoke about the core values of Carter's Essentials, the importance of integrity and honesty, and his commitment to restoring the company to its rightful course. The news of the crackdown spread quickly. Other employees involved in the scam were identified and dealt with. New management was brought in, and strict new policies were implemented. Daniel's decisive actions sent a clear message throughout the company. Unethical behavior would not be tolerated. In the following months, Daniel's presence in the company became more pronounced. He initiated training programs focused on ethics and customer service, installed a more transparent system for monitoring transactions, and opened lines of communication for employees to report unethical behavior without fear of retaliation. The transformation was not overnight, but it was profound. Customer satisfaction improved, employee morale boosted, and slowly, the tarnished reputation of Carter's Essentials began to shine once again. Daniel's bold move to expose and correct the corruption had not only saved his business, but had also reaffirmed his belief in the principles upon which he had built his empire. Daniel's journey from undercover trainee to a decisive leader exemplified his dedication to his company and his moral compass. It was a stark reminder that leadership is not just about overseeing operations, but about upholding values that foster trust and respect. The morning sun had barely risen, but the atmosphere inside the Carter's Essentials store was tenser than any midday rush. A mandatory staff meeting had been called, an unusual occurrence that had sparked a buzz of speculation among the employees. They gathered in the main hall, a space usually filled with the sound of checkout beeps and customer chatter, now repurposed into a makeshift assembly area. Daniel Carter walked in at precisely 8 a.m., the posted start time of the meeting. Gone was the trainee attire he had donned for the past week. In its place, he wore a sharp business suit, the kind that screamed authority and demanded respect. The transformation from Dan the trainee to Daniel Carter, the CEO, was stark and deliberate. As he stepped forward, the room fell into a hush. Eyes widened and whispers ceased. Mike, who was laughing with a colleague moments earlier, went pale the instant he saw Daniel. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like he'd seen a ghost. Beside him, the store manager's expression shifted from confusion to dread in a matter of seconds. He seemed to shrink, his body tensing as if bracing for an impact. Daniel didn't waste time with pleasantries. He moved to the front of the room, where a small table held a laptop connected to a speaker system. The air was thick with anxiety. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the staff. "I'm sure you are all wondering why I've called this meeting," Daniel began, his voice calm, but carrying a sharp edge that cut through the silence. "Over the past week, I've been among you, not as your CEO, but as Dan, a trainee cashier." A murmur swept through the crowd. Eyes darted back and forth, and the pieces started falling into place for the staff. Daniel continued, "I've learned a lot during my time at the registers, much more than I expected." He paused, turning his laptop around, facing the gathered employees. "And I believe it's best if you all hear what I've discovered." With a click, the room filled with the sound of Mike's voice, not from the man himself, but from the recording Daniel had made. The audio was clear, each word distinctly capturing Mike's boasting about overcharging customers and manipulating sales. You could hear the pride in his voice as he detailed his exploits. As the recording played, the expressions around the room shifted from shock to anger to disappointment. Mike stood frozen. His earlier bravado evaporated as his own words condemned him. When the recording ended, a heavy silence enveloped the room. Daniel fixed his gaze on Mike, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. "Do you have anything to say?" Daniel asked, his tone even but firm. Mike opened his mouth, then closed it, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape. Finally, he stammered, That's not... It's out of context." "Out of context?" Daniel's voice was incredulous. He turned to the store manager. "And you were supposed to oversee the operations. You were trusted to manage this store according to our values. Did you know about this?" The manager, his face ashen, swallowed hard. He glanced at Mike, then back at Daniel, and nodded slowly. "Yes, I was aware, but it just got out of hand before I could..." "Out of hand?" Daniel's voice rose slightly, echoing off the walls. "It didn't get out of hand. It was never in hand to begin with." The room was utterly silent, the staff motionless as they absorbed the gravity of their manager's betrayal. Daniel took a moment to let his words sink in, then addressed the room at large. "This ends today. The unethical practices, the deception, the greed, it stops now. We are going to clean house, starting with immediate suspensions for those involved." He looked around, his gaze lingering on the faces of his employees, the honest ones who had come to work every day believing in the integrity of their roles. "I founded Carter's Essentials to be a place of trust, where customers could shop knowing they were treated fairly, and employees could work proud of what they represent. We will restore that trust, no matter what it takes." The meeting concluded with Daniel promising a thorough investigation and restructuring of store management. As the staff filed out, the mood was somber but reflective. They had seen the worst of what their workplace could be, but also glimpsed the promise of what it was supposed to be under Daniel's renewed leadership. For Daniel, walking out of the hall didn't just mark the end of the meeting, it signified the beginning of a crucial rebuilding phase, one that would redefine the future of Carter's Essentials. The fallout from the dramatic revelation was swift and decisive. Within hours of the meeting, Mike was terminated, his dismissal serving as a clear signal of Daniel's commitment to integrity. The store manager, whose involvement had been confirmed by his own admission, was also let go. The message was unmistakable. Unethical behavior would no longer be tolerated under any circumstances at Carter's Essentials. As the dust began to settle, Daniel took immediate steps to stabilize the store's atmosphere and restore confidence among the team members, who had remained honest and unsuspecting of their supervisor's misconduct. He gathered the employees in the break room, a smaller, more intimate setting than the main hall used for the disclosure. "Listen, I know this has been a shock for all of you," Daniel began, his tone more reassuring than it had been during the confrontation. "I want to make it clear that those of you who have been doing your jobs honestly have nothing to worry about. Your positions here are safe. What happened today is not a reflection on you, but rather on the few who chose to deceive." He paused, looking around the room at the faces of his staff, some still stunned, others nodding appreciatively. "From now on, this store will be monitored more closely, not to police you, but to protect you and our customers. We're going to make sure that this never happens again." The next steps involved reaching out to the community and the customers who had been wronged. Daniel authorized a customer service initiative that included contacting every customer who had transactions flagged as suspicious during the audit of Mike's register activity. These customers received personalized apologies and were offered full refunds for any discrepancies found. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many customers expressing their appreciation for the company's transparency and commitment to making things right. Moreover, Daniel announced a company-wide audit across all store locations. This was not just a reactionary measure but a proactive strategy to ensure that the problems identified in one store were not systemic throughout the company. The audit would be thorough, conducted by an external firm with no ties to the company, to ensure impartiality and accuracy. The results of the audits led to further changes within Carter's Essentials. Some policies were overhauled to strengthen oversight and reduce the likelihood of similar issues arising in the future. New training programs were developed, focusing on ethics and customer service, to reinforce the company's values among all employees. These actions had a ripple effect across the entire chain. Employees at other stores took notice of the swift accountability measures and the reinforcement of ethical standards. A renewed sense of pride and responsibility took hold, with many team members stepping up to commend Daniel for his leadership and to suggest their own ideas for improving the company. The impact extended beyond the internal workings of Carter's Essentials. The business community and the retail industry at large noted Daniel's commitment to transparency and ethics. Competitors and analysts alike praised the bold steps he took to address the issue head-on, setting a new benchmark for corporate responsibility. For Daniel, the aftermath of the exposure was a period of reflection and action. He had seen the worst of what his company could become and had taken decisive steps to steer it back to its founding principles. The challenges he faced had not only tested his resolve, but had ultimately strengthened his vision for what Carter's Essentials should stand for: trust, integrity, and a relentless commitment to the customer. The journey was far from over, but Daniel was ready to lead the way, ensuring that the legacy of Carter's Essentials would be defined not by the misdeeds of the few, but by the honest, hard-working majority and the loyal customers they served. In the weeks following the upheaval at Carter's Essentials, Daniel Carter took the opportunity to address his employees and stakeholders directly. He stood in the very store where the corruption had been unearthed, surrounded by the very people who had witnessed the dramatic changes. His presence was not just as a leader, but as a pillar of the values he espoused. "This company was built on trust," Daniel began, his voice resonating through the aisles that had seen both deceit and truth revealed. "And trust starts at the ground level. From now on, I won't just sit in an office. I'll be watching." His statement was a promise, an assurance that the days of disconnected leadership were over. Daniel committed to a more hands-on approach, ensuring that the principles of integrity and transparency were not just upheld, but woven into the fabric of everyday operations. As news of Daniel's undercover mission and the dramatic exposure of corruption spread, the public response was overwhelmingly positive. Social media buzzed with praise for his courageous actions. Customers shared stories of their renewed faith in a brand that stood up against wrongdoing from within. The narrative quickly went viral, transcending the retail industry and sparking discussions about corporate responsibility and ethical leadership. The media coverage was extensive. Interviews and news articles painted Daniel as a trailblazer for transparency, a CEO who dared to look inward and cleanse his company of corruption. This publicity not only restored customer confidence, but also set a precedent for other corporations, challenging them to examine their own practices and leadership structures. The lesson from these events was clear and resonated far beyond the walls of Carter's Essentials. The truth always comes out, and when it does, it changes everything. This principle became the cornerstone of Daniel's new mission, to ensure that his company would never again stray from the path of integrity. He implemented regular audits, not just as a form of oversight, but as a standard practice to maintain and reinforce trust. Training programs were revamped to focus not only on skills, but also on ethical decision-making, fostering a culture where honesty was not just expected, but celebrated. Daniel also initiated a series of open forums, both in person and online, where employees at all levels could voice concerns, suggest improvements, and discuss the values that should guide their work. These forums proved to be invaluable, strengthening the bonds between management and staff, and providing insights that led to real and positive changes throughout the company. Months later, as Daniel walked through one of his stores, he could feel the shift in atmosphere. There was a sense of pride among the employees, a shared commitment to the company's renewed ethos. Customers, too, noticed the change, often expressing their appreciation for the company's honest approach and the visible efforts to improve. Reflecting on the tumultuous events, Daniel knew that the path he had chosen was not the easiest, but it was right. The crisis had been a harsh but necessary catalyst for change, forcing Carter's Essentials to evolve into a better, stronger version of itself. In a world where the lines between right and wrong can often seem blurred, the events at Carter's Essentials served as a reminder of the enduring power of truth and the transformative impact of confronting reality, no matter how difficult. For Daniel, and for everyone at his company, it was a profound lesson in the importance of living the values they professed, a lesson that would guide them well into the future.